So welcome to everybody joining us in Zoom and in a moment on YouTube. We'll get started right at 2:30 with a look at our skies tonight. So just one more minute to go. Thanks for joining us on YouTube now that our live stream is going. And thank you for joining us if you're in Zoom. We will get started in just a moment here, just a minute at 2:30. All right. Well, welcome everybody who's here with us this afternoon, eager to learn about the stars they'll see out at the sky tonight, or if you're watching this later on our YouTube channel or on Kingdom Access Television or your own local cable affiliate. We're excited to have you with us here at the Fairbanks Museum and Planetarium, or at least in our virtual classroom. Just a few notes for those of you in Zoom. You can ask us questions today during our class by using the Q&A button down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you scroll down there, you'll see it. You can also chat with us in the chat screen. So feel free to ask questions and chat with us. We envision these classes every Tuesday and Thursday at 2:30 as being interactive so that you can take what you learn and step out into your backyard at night and also look at the night sky and the constellations. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our dynamic presenter, Bobby Farlice-Rubio, and we look forward to having you enjoy today's class and join us again sometime soon.
Well, thank you so much, Drew. And thanks everyone for tuning in. I know the cloudy weather lately has not made it easy for stargazing, but there have been some clear nights. And let me get started by sharing that Stellarium program that we use here. So you can get this for free, stellarium.org on any computer and download it from their website. And you can use it to follow along and to practice and study before the night comes so that when it does get dark, you will be able to find everything we're talking about. Well, I'm going to move our view over towards the west. Of course, today's sunset will be around 7:49. Notice how much longer our days are and than our nights now. That trend will continue until the summer solstice. But by hitting the L key on your keyboard or advancing the fast forward button on Stellarium down here on the bottom, you can go through time more quickly and we'll get to see that sunset. And there's some things that haven't changed since our last viewings together, but there's something new that appeared in the sky alongside some familiar friends. So we've got Venus. That's been in the sky for many weeks, but maybe you noticed that there's something that accompanied Venus starting last week. This is the moon. Of course, at this view in Stellarium, it doesn't look like the moon. It looks like a bigger dot. Stellarium tries to keep things to scale. So to make you see that it's the moon, you got to zoom in with this function here. And we can see that it is a waxing crescent moon. Of course, the crescent moon, when it's waxing, is getting larger, and it will be a full moon in about a week and a half. And this full moon will be the one known as the flower moon. Just in time for May and all those spring ephemeral flowers that are going to be blooming from now on. So this is what the moon is going to look like tonight relative to Venus. But maybe you were watching over the last few nights and you saw something really cool happen. Let me go back in time with our little date and time function here on Stellarium. You can hit the date and go backwards. So today's Tuesday, Monday night, the moon was there. And on Sunday night, the moon was there. And if you were out on Saturday night, the moon was right below Venus. So you may have seen this little rendezvous, this little pas de deux, this conjunction, as it's called in astronomy, that happened over the weekend as the moon appeared in the sky. Oops, I jumped forward too far. Hold on. There we go. So this was Sunday, Monday, and now Tuesday. So there is where the moon will be tonight. But that moon and Venus rendezvous, it's going to happen again in about a month. Of course, as the moon goes through its phases, it repeats that cycle and it'll pass by Venus again near the end of May. So don't worry if you missed it, you'll get another chance to see it before Venus is out of sight. But that's where things are going to be tonight. And now let me advance time farther to get it a little darker. So if you're out about half an hour or so after sunset, maybe 45 minutes after sunset, you will be able to see a lot more than just Venus and the moon, of course. But you may notice there's Orion, the most distinctive constellation of the winter time. You can see that he's barely visible at twilight. And like I said before, by the end of this month, you won't really be able to see him at all. And that's almost the same for Taurus the bull. And that includes, if you remember from our previous talks, the Seven Sisters cluster. That whole family of constellations, Taurus and Orion, this is your last couple nights to see them at all. And you have to have a really good view of the west if you want to see them. But notice how Venus has moved away from that Pleiades Seven Sisters cluster, as we talked about in previous episodes. Venus is tracking in a direction that will allow us to see it for a lot longer. It is not fixed. Remember, it is a planet moving through the constellations, following the line roughly that we call the ecliptic or the zodiac that goes right through the head of Taurus the bull. So that's a little bit of recap of some of the things that we have talked about in the past. You'll still see Sirius, the dog star, and you'll still see Procyon and the little dog. So big dog, little dog, and the Gemini twins. In fact, that's where the moon will be. If you look at the Gemini twins, you might notice the moon will look like it's right in between the twin brothers there. So that's where you can mark the moon. And this shouldn't surprise you if you think of Gemini and the other zodiac constellations. The planets and the moon all follow that line, the zodiac, very closely. And just to be complete, the reason why we call it the ecliptic is that the moon, as you can see, it's not exactly on that ecliptic line, but when it's a new moon and the moon is on the ecliptic, we will have a solar eclipse. That doesn't happen every month. And if it's a full moon and it's exactly on the ecliptic, we'll have a lunar eclipse, what has now lately been called the blood moon. And that doesn't happen every month, although they do happen at least, once or twice a year. So a lunar eclipse, solar eclipse, that's where the ecliptic gets its modern name. But if you're a fan of old astronomy, you know that in ancient times, that was the same line that we call the zodiac or the horoscope. So the moon always on the horoscope, tonight in Gemini. But let's move our view over a little bit. I want to remind you of other things we talked about, like Leo the lion, Cancer the crab. They are still visible. In fact, they'll just be easier and easier to see as the night goes on. But I want to talk about what happens after it's totally dark and looking towards the east. You might remember this star, Vega. If you were watching these broadcasts, Vega was not visible until 9 o'clock or a little after that last week. But now, before 9 o'clock, it's already up in the sky. So if you're looking towards the east, you might see something very bright, almost rivaling Sirius or Venus in brightness. That is Vega of the Lyra constellation. And let's go on through the night to see what's going to happen when it gets fully dark. All right. Now it's about 10:20. Vega's much higher in the sky, and you can see one of its companions in what we call the summer triangle, Deneb. So I want to talk about that summer triangle a little bit more and introduce you to some of the other constellations. But now I want to think about Vega and Lyra, the constellation, in a new way. So if you were here before, you might remember, as a little recap, Vega, the star, is the brightest star of Lyra. And although Lyra is thought to be the lyre of Orpheus in ancient Greek mythology, for other folks around the world, this has made different pictures. And Vega comes from the Arabic word alvika, because of the fact that ancient Arab astronomers used to call this the diving eagle. That's what alvika means. So there's a couple of cultures represented in the names we use with this constellation. But I want to look for something a little faint that you need a telescope to see. I know most of the stuff we've been talking about is things that you can see with your own eyes, but there's a target for a telescope in Vega, in Lyra, excuse me, in Lyra, between these two bright stars over here. Let me see if I can find it without having to use the guides. There it is. Okay, if you use Stellarium, if you zoom in, now just back up so that you see what I've done. Think of that shape right there of the diving eagle on one of the lower wingtips on the right-hand side, about, almost midway between these two bright stars that you see there. There's something that I like to call the Cheerio. If you use a telescope, it might look like a little circle, like a ring, like a donut, like a bagel floating in space. And if you have more powerful telescopes, you can see that this is actually what's called a planetary nebula. Now, we haven't done much of deep space objects in these sessions, but this one is one that you may want to know more about. A planetary nebula is a confusing name because they were thought to be something resembling a planet when they were first discovered centuries ago because of their round shape. But really, a better name for a planetary nebula would be a ghost star. Yes, this is a star that has expired, and that little dot right in the center is the core of what was once a star very similar to the sun. That little dot is a white dwarf, and you can look that up if you want to know more about white dwarfs. White dwarfs are a category of star, but they kind of represent the cinders, the burnt out ashes of a star that has already completely run out of fuel and has burned up most of the gases that it could use to fuse into energy, and then now is slowly dissipating away, being inflated like a bubble of gas that inflates and inflates until finally it dissipates. So that ring that you see is about 2 light years wide, meaning that each side of that bubble of gas has traveled a light year away from the original white dwarf that was the core. And that means that if there were any planets in that star system long ago, they would have long ago been vaporized by that wave of gas as it passed them, as it expanded the ring nebula. And I hate to say this in a sad way, but this star, this ring nebula, this planetary nebula as we know it, represents what the fate of our sun will be in the far distant future. So wait, don't worry. I know some of you are hearing this and thinking, oh no, the sun is going to expand to the point where it vaporizes us and all the other planets and we'll be doomed. That may happen, but we still have 5 billion summers left to enjoy this sun that we have and this planet before this is expected to happen. And just as a reminder, the Earth is only 4.5 billion years old. So we're not even halfway through the merry-go-round ride around the sun. This is not something that you need to panic about, and I do not ever want to add to anyone's anxieties, especially at this time we're in. So the sun is fine. It's going to be around for 5 billion more years, but the ring nebula kind of gives us a hint as to what the future of the solar system could look like. And as we talk a lot about astronomy and other concepts here in our little broadcast, let me back out so you can see where the ring nebula is in the Lyra constellation. So I don't want you to worry about this at all, but just think about the fact that humans, we're bound to become a space-faring civilization. 5 billion years from now, when the sun threatens planet Earth, what will humans be capable of? Will we still be around? Hopefully. Will whatever is descended from us still even look like us 5 billion years from now? Who knows? But I would like to believe that if life on Earth has to end someday because the sun does that, that doesn't mean life from Earth has to end. This is why so many folks are excited about making humans into a spacefaring civilization. It's not to abandon planet Earth anytime soon. It's to plan for the inevitable fact that humans will probably be expanding and exploring new locations. And eventually, 5 billion years from now, we'll have to. All right. Well, I think let me stop this share for a moment because I think we have some questions coming in. Let me know, Drew, if there's anything anybody's asking. I just see you put up a post there.
Yeah, just reminding people to ask their questions as we're getting to the last sort of 10, 15 minutes of class. Yeah.
I don't want to wax poetically like the waxing crescent moon about all this stuff, folks. But this is why folks who think about space think about the inevitability of humans living in space. We're gonna have to spread out. Who knows? Maybe we'll be able to tow the planet Earth with us and bring it along, as a relic of our original mother. And we'll have humans living on tens of thousands of colonies all around the cosmos. That's possible. So I would like to think that that's a brighter version of the future, something like Gene Roddenberry's vision with Star Trek. Something like that will happen with humans eventually. But let's go back to Stellarium for the last couple minutes that we have here. I hope some of you, or if you're watching or participating, please do let us have your questions as soon as possible before we're off live, or we can answer them after the fact, but it's much more fun to take your questions now if you have them. But there is the constellation Lyra, the home of Vega, the bright star that is the brightest of the three we call the Summer Triangle. So speaking of other worlds and the future of humankind, let me advance the clock a little bit so that we can see the three stars of the Summer Triangle. And perhaps next time we'll talk about the other members of the Summer Triangle, but I just want to give you a tantalizing hint about one of them. Now, you see this, if you want to see the whole Summer Triangle, you're going to have to stay up until past midnight. And that's because Altair down here is the lowest of the stars, so it rises latest. However, Vega was out as soon as it got dark, before 9 o'clock. And this one over here is Deneb. So with these three stars, Vega, the brightest, Deneb, the second brightest, and Altair, the third brightest, you have the stars that make the Summer Triangle. And the Summer Triangle will actually be with us from now up until November, almost December. So you really see it for a long time. And notice what's in the background. Right behind the Summer Triangle is the beautiful dusty lanes of the Milky Way. And that is something that we love to see all summer long. And the Summer Triangle and the Milky Way's best viewed portions coincide with each other. So as you watch this triangle rise, you're going to get better and better views of the Milky Way. And let me see if we have any questions coming in. All right. Looks like, yeah, somebody has a question about Venus, I see. So, okay, Venus, let me see if I can do that for you with Stellarium and maybe explain why you're having a hard time seeing it. Venus has phases. So what you see in your telescope might surprise you. Let's see if I can replicate it here. The only problem is that Venus is so bright that it can actually dazzle your eyes in the telescope and blind your ability to see detail. So whoever's trying to look at Venus, if you have trouble, let's check out if your telescope actually has a limiter on light. Some telescopes have a lens cap that has a smaller opening and then a larger opening. The smaller opening is for looking at things like the moon and Venus, where you really don't need all of the light, because it actually can be blinding. So try limiting it or using a filter. But I'm going to go back to Stellarium just for a moment to help you figure out how to make Venus easier to see. Let me see what it looks like now. So here we are in Stellarium. And of course, I've been talking about the Summer Triangle on the opposite side of the sky. So we'll continue that conversation in our next talk on Thursday. But remember, Venus was in the west. So I'm going to back up time because we've stayed up past midnight. So I'm going to reverse the skies, and would something that would be a very scary thing to see outside if the sky, everything was rising out of the west. There's Venus above that tree. So let me pause time. And let's see how Stellarium expects us to see Venus in a telescope. So here's what might fool you. If you're looking at a telescope and you expect to see a round planet, that is the case when you look at Jupiter and Saturn and Mars. They always look like a full round picture because of the fact that they are farther from the sun than we are. So whenever we look at them, we're seeing their day side completely. But Venus has the behavior of being closer to the sun than we are, and it actually has a smaller orbit. So Venus passes in between us and the sun. And you can kind of tell that in this picture. Venus is dipping towards the sun and is closer to us than the sun right now. And that's why Venus is so bright. And as it gets closer to the sun, I mean, our view, we lose sight of it, but it also gets a little bit brighter. So right now, that crescent phase is what you should be seeing in your telescope. And if you can't, it must be a focus adjustment. Otherwise, I would just think that you might be dealing with too much light. So you might need to use a filter to figure out how to do this. If your eyes are blinded, see if you can try using a camera to take a very short exposure. If you're good at photography, you can set the shutter speed. Otherwise, maybe fiddling around with the settings on your phone, you can try to take a picture through the eyepiece of your telescope and see if by lowering the brightness, maybe you can see that shape that might otherwise be blaring. I mean, even in stellarium, you can see that once you zoom out a little bit, it just becomes a bright dot and the detail is lost. And that's what often happens in the telescope because Venus is so bright compared to anything else you see in the sky. It's brighter than any star. Only the moon can rival Venus's brightness. So your telescope is, kind of getting too much light, which is usually not the case. That might be your problem. So, well, any more questions coming in from folks, Drew?
Not seeing any on my email, but this is everybody's chance. If you want to ask a question, now is the time. In Zoom, you can use that Q&A box or the chat that we pointed out. If you're on YouTube or cable access television, remember, you can always email us your questions. My email is dbush@fairbanksmuseum.org. That's DBUSH. So I don't know, Bobby, if you want to maybe wrap up with your final thoughts, and then we can see if we get a few last questions here. Anything good to look for tonight in particular out of the things that you just pointed out?
Well, that beautiful crescent moon in Venus, that alone is worth getting outside to see. The Lyrid meteor shower has pretty much peaked, but you might still see a few stray ones looking like they're radiating out of Lyra that we just talked about. But as a sneak preview for Thursday, that constellation that's next to Lyra that has the star Deneb, one of the three of the summer triangle, Altair the dimmest, Deneb the second, and Vega the brightest. Well, in between Deneb and Vega, on the wing of the swan that we call Cygnus, and I'll show you how to see that next Thursday, there is the zone where the Kepler Space Telescope was searching for exoplanets. Now, many people have heard of the Hubble Space Telescope, which just celebrated its 30th anniversary. Imagine what we couldn't see before we had the Hubble Space Telescope. But the Kepler Space Telescope is similar in that it is in space, orbiting like a satellite, but the Kepler Space Telescope was the planet hunter. Its job was simply to search for exoplanets, planets going around other stars besides the sun. So if you think about what I was talking about humans expanding and becoming a spacefaring civilization, well, we've already got a list of over 4,000 exoplanets that we've been studying, planets that are going around other stars besides the sun. In fact, I remember when I was in high school, the time they announced the first exoplanet. So since I was a teenager until now, so long ago, well, there have been 4,000 planets discovered outside of the solar system. So if you think about that rate of discovery, there's probably billions of worlds. So humans in the future might be living on many of these planets that we're just discovering. And the place where Kepler discovered all of its planets is in that direction between Vega and Deneb on the summer triangle. So think of how cool that is, that if you look at that direction, there's thousands of worlds in that direction. And imagine how many more there could be in all the other directions in the sky. Just in case you're wondering, if you want to know more about that, look up the mission called TESS, the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite. That is Kepler's replacement, except Kepler was looking in a narrow part of the sky. The TESS satellite is designed to look in every single direction, and it's already found dozens. And you can look that up on NASA's Exoplanet Archive. They have a complete detailed listing of all the exoplanets that have been found. So those of you who want to do some deep stargazing, get a telescope, look for that Cheerio in Lyra. Then you can think about the fate of the sun, but don't be discouraged. Be encouraged by the fact that we already know of all these other planets that maybe have life, could maybe possibly harbor our life in the future. So there's a lot to think about when you see those constellations. And looking to the east is looking at the stuff that's going to be our summertime sky. So I hope you get out there and enjoy it. I hope the weather clears enough for you to see these beautiful diamonds glittering in the sky. And until that time, Thank you all for tuning in. And thank you, Drew.
Yeah, and thanks, Bobby. And of course, as Bobby and I both mentioned, you can join us again on Thursday at 2:30. We'll have our next installment. I hope in the meantime, as Bobby said, you guys are all getting outside and taking a chance to look at the night sky with what you've learned from our classes. So a warm thank you to Bobby Farlice-Rubio for today's class, and a warm thank you to everybody joining us on Zoom, on YouTube, on cable access. We're grateful to have you with us today, and we hope you keep looking up.
Yes, and those of you who are using telescopes, if you do get a chance to snap a picture of Venus, please send it our way to dbush@fairbanksmuseum.org, and maybe we'll feature it in one of our presentations to show what folks like you have been able to do. So good luck with that picture, and keep looking up. Thank you, Drew.
Yeah, I stole Bobby's line there, but definitely
all
send
right.
us some
I stole it
photos.
from Jack Horkheimer, who ran the Planetarium in Miami when I was a kid, and I used to watch his television shows doing what I'm doing now. So it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to Jack Horkheimer. And I think it was a joke based on a James Dean movie. But anyway, we'll look into that for some other time.
Okay, well, I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon.
All right, take care, Drew. Bye.
Bye-bye.